Please join me in the prayer for illumination. Revealing God,
you walk among us unseen. Open our eyes, calling and inviting God. You speak to us in myriad ways. Open our ears, searching and challenging us. You push us to widen the circle of our responsibility. Open our spirits. Use our eyes and ears and lives to provide a welcome at your table, to reach out in care and concern for the least and lost among us, and to build up your kingdom all around us. Amen.
A reading from the Gospel of Mark. Hear the word of the Lord. In the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. Then Peter remembered and said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered. Jesus answered him, have faith in God. Truly I tell you, if you say to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and if you do not doubt in your heart, but believe that what you say will come to pass, it will be done for you. So I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you will have received it, and it will be yours. Whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Death's ropes bound me. The distress of the grave found me. I came face to face with trouble and grief. So I called on the Lord's name. Lord, please save me. The Lord is merciful and righteous. Our God is compassionate. The Lord protects simple folk. He saves me whenever I am brought down. I tell myself, you can be at peace again, because the Lord has been good to you. You, God, have delivered me from death, my eyes from tears and my foot from stumbling. So I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. I have remained faithful, even when I said I am suffering so badly, even when I said out of fear, everyone is a liar. What can I give back to the Lord for all the good things he has done for me? I will lift up the cup of salvation. I will call on the Lord's name. I will keep the promises I made to the Lord in the presence of all God's people. Oh yes, Lord, I am definitely your servant. I am your servant and the son of your female servant. You have freed me from all my chains. So I will offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving to you, and I will call on the Lord's name. I'll keep the promises I made to the Lord in the presence of all God's people, in the courtyards of the Lord's house, which is in the center of Jerusalem. Praise the Lord. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. One of my favorite parts of unscheduled Saturdays, when I have them, is listening to the Moth Radio Hour on Minnesota Public Radio at noon. I don't always have unscheduled Saturdays, so I don't get a chance to listen every week. I know, plenty of people have told me that I could listen to the Moth through a podcast, but I don't do those. I actually like the almost accidental nature of coming across a chance to tune in and listen on the radio as it's broadcast. The Moth Radio Hour is part of a much larger organization that is encouraging the sharing of personal stories all around the world. They host live events, they sponsor storytelling workshops, they publish blogs, and they hold story slams, whatever those are. On NPR at noon on Saturdays, you usually hear 3 or 4 stories told by individuals that have been selected for the broadcast. Sometimes they go together, sometimes not. Often there's a theme. Some are really good stories. Some are hard, difficult to listen to. Some just don't even grab me at all. But I always come away from listening to the Moth Radio Hour with an appreciation for the gift of the story. Now, we had a wonderful speaker at a Presbyterian meeting a few weeks ago, who is a pastor in Chicago, of a church that is built totally around stories. And what do you know, they introduced us to her that Saturday morning at the Korean Presbyterian Church as someone who has performed on the Moth Radio Hour more than one time. I immediately knew I was going to like her, was going to appreciate what she had for us, even if I had to miss my Saturday radio listening to be at that meeting. Rebecca Anderson was her name. She told some great stories that morning. She shared with us all about her church called Gilead in Chicago. And she even got the whole presbytery involved in some of the ways that they use stories on Sunday mornings in worship. The slips of paper that you found in your bulletins, and many of you returned, thank you, are one of her suggestions for how to use stories in worship. She said the easiest way we can share our stories with one another is simply to answer a quick prompt, like the one that you had, and collect them and weave them into the worship service somehow, the sermon, the prayers, the announcements, the offering, or even the charge and benediction. So I have plenty of answers to the prompts. If you still have one and would like to turn it in, please give it to me after worship today, because I'll be interested to have it. If you filled out a slip of paper today, I thank you sincerely. And if you did not, if you're waiting to see, perhaps you will still hear your own stories in the words of someone else's story today, and you'll be more ready to contribute your own the next time I give you the chance. But God's word comes to us today from the 116th Psalm, The story that is in this psalm might in fact be an invitation for us to share our own stories. In church speak, mostly other traditions than our own mainline church experiences, storytelling is called witnessing or testimony. Now, I find that we tend to shy away from those words in the Presbyterian traditions. They fall a little too close for comfort to a fundamentalist or evangelical or Pentecostal tendency, I suppose. But perhaps we can reclaim the practice of witnessing, the practice of testimony, if not the terminology, for just a little bit this morning as we look at these words of the 116th Psalm. This psalm is a delightful and rich psalm, a psalm of thanksgiving, a heartfelt shout out to God, thanking God for all the many things that God has done for the author, promising to share that experience in the presence of all God's people. It's clearly a personal story shared because the psalmist begins with that simple, "I love that God listens to me." Now, this might strike us as foreign or dated or simplistic in our modern and secularized world to proclaim that God listens to us when we call out of our distress, when we ask God for aid in our troubles, even when we thank God for favors we believe we've received from the divine hand. It doesn't ring true, I know, to attempt to prove such a belief with instances from just our churchy experiences. Because for every time that we feel certain of a divine response, we can also name, I believe, any number of examples of apparent lack of response. But the psalmist, you see, is not asking us to believe as she does. All the psalmist asks of us is to listen to the narrative of her own experience, her personal story, and the results of it. So, let's hear some of our own stories. Here are some snippets. I knew God was with me when my team turned from just being a team into a family. I knew God was with me during the passing of my grandmother. I knew God was with me when my children were born, when I was in the mountains, when I beat breast cancer. I knew God was with me when tragedy struck a family member. I knew God was with me when I regained consciousness and was still alive, when I was alone at night during a thunderstorm. I knew God was with me through back and knee injuries. I knew God was with me when I was a child. I knew God was with me when my children were born. I thought God was absent when my dad died unexpectedly, way too young. I thought God was absent when I lost my marriage. I thought God was absent when I was all alone. I thought God was absent when I was upset. I thought God was absent when I was really troubled. I thought God was absent when my husband was diagnosed with dementia. I thought God was absent so many times. Stories told on the Moth Radio Hour are, quote, true as remembered by the storyteller and always told live. These are not professional voice actors reading a script of someone else's carefully crafted story. They're not even written scripts as far as I know, though a great deal of work often goes into telling a good story. This is a reminder, I think, that our stories, they are our own. They belong to us. But it is as we share them that they can become an avenue for a universal truth. The truth of the narrative in our psalm for today is, death ropes bound me, the distress of the grave found me, I came face to face with trouble and grief. Though the details are left out in this psalm, some suggest that this was indeed a reference to a physical fatal illness, and others read it as more of a metaphorical death. Whichever it was is far less important than the certainty of the new possibility of hope and renewed life. When the psalmist says, I called on the Lord's name, Lord, please save me. In effect, the psalmist recognized the fact that her life was no longer manageable on her own. And God, the psalmist is convinced, came through for her. Let's check some more pieces of our stories. I was really in trouble when I did not have a mentor to teach me what I needed to know. I am really in trouble when I leave tasks till the last minute. I was really in trouble when money was very low to care for my children. I was really in trouble when I was hospitalized. I was really in trouble when I lost my job. I was really in trouble when I got divorced. I really needed God when family members passed away. I really needed God when my family, my parents and siblings passed away one by one. I really needed God when my mom's dementia worsened. I needed God when my father died. I needed God when I struggled to make a decision on whether to stay with the church. I really needed God when a loved one died. I really needed God when I hurt someone. The psalmist's certainty of God's actions on her behalf turns out to be what has urged this public act of thanksgiving, the proclamation of this very psalm. And what's the effect of such public acts? It is that everyone who hears it can witness to and celebrate with the psalmist's deliverance. Thus, we can participate in her joy and her triumph. These fuller acts of thanksgiving bring the conviction of God's work into the open. They offer opportunities for celebration to the larger body of Christ. Now, I know too often we modern folk may think that a witness like this one in Psalm 116 will only make other people feel jealous or depressed because they may not have received a similar triumph, and they can't totally enter into the joy of the renewed sufferer. But the Apostle Paul, in his powerful metaphor in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, suggests to us otherwise. Remember, Paul wrote, because we are one body, if one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. Could it be our hesitance toward public sharing that we miss the chances to suffer with members of our family of faith as well as rejoice with them? Psalm 116 urges us to take our thanks to God public in order that others might be encouraged to ask of God for themselves. That is ultimately what testimony or witnessing is, friends. The stories, of course, are personal to us. They belong to us. But when we do share them, they can support and encourage others in their own stories. Because, remember, it's not about just us. It's about God. It's about seeing God in everyday life. It's about experiencing the hand of God in ordinary moments. It's about recognizing God at work in the world from Monday through Saturday this week, not just on Sunday, and not just way back when in the Bible. It takes some practice, of course. It takes mindfulness, if you will, to notice God, because we're busy, or we're stressed, and we're not actually all that religious, right? But in this witnessing, in this testimony, I'm not asking you to pray publicly on a street corner. I'm not encouraging you to hand out leaflets or recruit converts at your workplace or at school. I'm simply inviting you to share, in whatever way you can, what God has done, what God is doing, what God will do in the future for you. Who knows? Who knows? You may tell a story and someone listening may have their own story to share. Who knows, you may tell a story and someone listening might be able to reframe their own experience and feel strengthened by that. Who knows? Who knows, you may tell a story and it may save a life. That's what the church in Chicago, Gilead, where our speaker is from, says about their storytelling. That as they learn to share their stories and make sense of them together, they are saving lives in the process. Just a few more stories from a few of us. My life was saved when I was baptized. My life was saved when I found a group of friends to support me. My life was saved when the church sponsored my kids to go to camp. My life was saved when I married a fabulous man 44 years ago. My life was saved when I married my wife. Really, I mean it. I was rescued when I started to attend church again. I felt rescued when friends from First Presbyterian showed up at my house. I was rescued when I saw a person looking over me. It's going to be okay. I was rescued when the doctor removed the cord that was so violently wrapped around my neck. I was rescued when people took care of me. I felt rescued when I learned to help others. I felt rescued when you were there for me. I felt rescued when I discovered my dad was not my birth father. I felt rescued when my college roommate helped me through severe homesickness. I felt rescued when I was embarrassed, when I was embraced by our church family, when my mother passed away. Stories save lives. Why do we tell the stories? Do such things finally prove that God always answers our prayers? Hardly, friends. We cannot be so foolish, so absurd to believe such a thing. But when someone receives a blessing, when someone is convinced that they have been listened to and heard by God, may it not embolden us, strengthen us, encourage us to ask for what we need for ourselves from God? And do we not all, indeed, crave that rich possibility that God, who loves to listen to us, might in deep mystery listen and hear, and then urge us, in fact, to proclaim our hearing from God to everyone we meet. May it be so. May it be so for each one of us, today and always. Amen.